with. So our next speaker for today is John Garcia Periche, is the co-founder and the chief government officer of Genia Latino America, a public benefit corporation with the mission of including Latin America into the global development of AI. He is a fellow from the Singularity University at NASA Ames Research Center in the Silicon Valley, and advisor to senior level officials in the public sector, doing strategic foresight and research for state ambassadors and ministers. Mr. Periche will tell us about Latin American perspective on AI and the 5 steps to create the LATAM ecosystem. Mr. Periche, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thank you to everyone in the Global AI Ethics Institute, the team, to the fellow panelists, and especially to the people joining this conversation. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. And I am honored to be part of the Global AI Ethics Institute. Creating such a space is highly needed, especially in a world where we're apparently directed towards a complete bifurcation or bifurcation between 2 global superpowers, which is definitely not the future we want. The future we want is a future of cooperation, integration, dialogue, and diversity. This conversation we're having today, and the topics we're covering today, are crucial to the future of our species. In the words of a Swedish cosmologist and recently turned AI theorist and philosopher, Max Tegmark, this is the most important conversation of our times. However, this conversation is being concentrated in a small group of privileged people, of usually white, male, and European, maybe American, and Chinese. However, most people in the world are not included in the conversation. There are some efforts being done on a global level and intergovernmental level. However, we obviously need to build these bridges. For that reason, I am happy to join this conversation. Today, I'll be sharing the perspective of Latin America. I'll provide an overview of what's happening in Latin America in the search to create this LATAM AI ecosystem, and what have we been doing in Latin America in regards to go in that direction. Before this panel, Emmanuel sent me a couple of kind of guiding questions that I would like to address in terms of our perspective in Latin America, in terms of AI ethics and governance in general in this new age. In general, AI ethics is not really a concern in Latin America. Artificial intelligence, or even technology in general, is not really a concern in Latin America. The real concerns, when I say concerns in Latin America, I mean the people in Latin America. When you go to the streets and you ask people, AI is not really a concern in Latin America. Corruption is a concern. Poverty is a concern. Violence, insecurity, inequality. In Latin America is the most unequal region in the entire world. Those are the real concerns in Latin America. Is it a problem that AI ethics is not a concern in Latin America? I mean, obviously, I think it's a problem. And that's why I quoted this Max Tegmark saying this is the most important conversation of our time. Since if I thought this was not a problem, I would not be doing what I do. So definitely, I think it is a problem that it's not really a concern. However, there is a growing consciousness in Latin America in terms of AI ethics, governance, and AI development in general. There's a rising number of countries that have developed or are developing national AI strategies. In recent years, we have seen significant progress in a few select countries. Out of the 100 countries, more AI ready in the world. 15 are from Latin America. For example, Colombia is the third country with the most advanced digital government in the world. We have also seen significant progress in Mexico, in Brazil, in Uruguay, and Chile. So, can a perspective from another culture be acceptable in Latin America in terms of AI ethics? Yes, absolutely. So, why we need to go to the origins of Latin America? Even the word Latin implies colonialism. So, before the colonialism process from Europe to the Americas, the Latin America did not even exist. So, what is Latin America? It's a combination of Hispanic, Portuguese, and to a lesser extent, French, because Spain, Portugal, and France colonized these territories. So Latin American people and ethnicity is really a mix of European colonizers, African slaves, and to a lesser extent, indigenous natives. Because, for example, in the country, in my country, in Dominican Republic, as well as most of the Caribbean and even most of the countries in Latin America, the indigenous population were completely killed. So there are, for example, in places like Bolivia, Peru, Mexico, there are still communities of indigenous population, but there are many countries in Latin America where there's no one single indigenous population left. So a lot of us in Latin America were like what they call the mestizos, which is the mixture of all the indigenous, European, African colonizers. So when we ask, can a perspective from another culture be acceptable in Latin America? Absolutely yes, because Latin America in its origin is a combination of different cultures and an imposition of different cultures in another territory. So the question of discrimination and bias, they are a concern to most people in Latin America. For example, racism. Coming from a history of slavery, racism is a concern to a lot of people that suffer in Latin America. The question of gender inequality, the question of gender discrimination, even though it is not really a concern in other cultures, given the cultural influence Latin American has, it is definitely a concern. For example, the word machismo. Machismo is a kind of part of Latin American culture. Machismo is part of Latin American culture. However, in recent times, there have been in many countries kind of a feminist uprising, obviously influenced by the Western feminist uprising, which Latin America is kind of part of the West, given the history of colonialism. So, in one way or in one sense, real development in Latin America, development seen as the improvement of people's lives, fighting these biases of racism, of machismo, are fundamental. In a sense, Western ethics is central to Latin America. If you ask what language do Latin Americans speak, mostly it's Spanish, coming from Spain. What God do most Latin Americans pray to? They pray to the Christian God. What political systems and political values do Latin American communities exercise? Is mostly the Western democratic, quote, democratic, liberal system. For example, last week or this week, the president of El Salvador, like his Congress abolished the Supreme Court. I mean, took out the justices, And like most countries in Latin America are criticizing that precisely because of the political values we have, which is the known Western liberal democratic order, even though Latin America is not very democratic itself, but it kind of reflects that system. Centuries of European colonialism, centuries from the 1500s, a couple of centuries. Then, after Europe being the colonizer of Latin America, suddenly there is a famous doctrine called the Monroe Doctrine, which after Europe, Latin America became kind of a colony of the United States. Not a colony in the traditional sense, but from colonization, we passed to imperialism. Kind of, it's just like the same pattern in different structure, in different modality. So Latin America has always, but in the inception of Latin America, been influenced by Western thought and Western ethics. The question of privacy, it is a concern in most of Latin America. However, it is not as deeply intertwined as, for example, in the United States, which privacy is at the core of their political systems and their political values, but it is a concern in most of Latin America. For example, Brazil is developing a very robust data privacy legislation, which is being studied all over Latin America. Yes, it kind of reflects GDPR, which comes again to this colonialist trend which Latin America has. But there are definitely some synchrony between Western ethics and how Latin America sees ethics in general. So, should a universal code of AI ethics be desirable? That was one of the questions that Emmanuel asked, like a guiding question for this conversation. And I think yes, it must. We must develop some kind of universal ethics, a code of ethics, but not necessarily. There are some aspects that need to be universal. For example, the reduction of harm and the reduction of risk. So, as the first speaker said, humanity is in danger. So, like artificial intelligence can be very similar to what we experienced, the world experienced last century with nuclear weapons. So there were global standards that needed to be set for us to ensure the survival of our species. However, particular implementations, particular relationships that different countries, different cultures, different regions have should be encouraged. It should not be a one size fits all code, but there are some necessary standards that I believe need to be ensured at a global perspective, mostly in regards to harm reduction in terms of the impact of artificial intelligence. So AI will add 16% to the global GDP by the year 2030, equivalent to 15.7 trillion, of which 500 billion will be generated in Latin America. This can only be compared with the level of impact that electricity had during the second industrial revolution, making AI literally the biggest commercial opportunity in the world economy. For that reason, the geopolitical dispute between the United States and China has a intrinsic technological vector, because the countries that lead artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence, I include the kind of the tech trends of the fourth industrial revolution, will be the countries that lead the future, just like In the previous centuries, the industrialized countries were the ones that structured the world order. So in terms of, oh yeah, we need a universal code of ethics, that's all a part of the world order structure. So will Latin America be leading some parts of it, having a voice to be heard, or just accepting and falling again into another period of colonialism? So in Latin America, we're not developing technology, we're just consuming. If any participation we have in the global ecosystem of innovation is only as users. And there's no doubt that transitioning from users to developers is the opportunity that Latin American has to leapfrog to a new stage of development. And that's precisely why we created Genia Latino America, which is a public benefit corporation with the mission of including Latin America into the global development of AI and the fourth industrial revolution. As Emmanuel said in the presentation, Genia was originally conceived in Singularity University inside of NASA at the center of Silicon Valley. And we saw that Latin America literally had no voice or no vote in this global ecosystem of innovation. And we saw the need to give agency to our people. And that's why we precisely created Genia. During the last 2 years, we have been working on structuring a regional AI strategy for Latin America, in which we're pushing an agenda with the main stakeholders in the region, the main multilateral organizations, as well as the many governments in Latin America. So within the framework of this regional strategy, we have signed important agreements. For example, an agreement of $100 million to build a smart city in Puerto Rico, together with Intermestic Partners, which are the senior advisors of Carlos Slim. We also signed a partnership with Singularity Studio and Singularity Net, which are the creator of the famous robot Sophia. And when I speak of regional AI strategy, so when I say what are the steps to creating this LATAM AI ecosystem, step number one is defining a data policy. Without data, AI does not work. Data is the prime resource of this new economy, and it will be useless to speak about AI, speak about AI ethics and AI implementation with no data. So Latin America really needs to start classifying data, extracting data, identifying and collecting data, to start processing data and creating those warehouses and databases and data repositories that can later be integrated in a regional scale. So for example, in the Dominican Republic, it's a small, tiny island where I live in, and I was born I'm Dominican. So those data sets that can be collected in the Dominican Republic are important. But if we could integrate with countries such as Mexico or different countries in Central America, we can create robust databases that integration can really serve to train robust AI systems that can be put in function to solving many public and even market problems. So the second step leading to this integration is definitely regional integration. And for that reason, we have been working to create LATAM 4.0. LATAM 4.0, obviously LATAM, Latin America 4.0, Fourth Industrial Revolution, is the first international coalition to build the Latin American ecosystem of artificial intelligence with the purpose of regionalizing AI under the criteria that national initiatives in Latin America are necessary, but only through a regional focus is that we can leapfrog to a next stage of development. When we say regionalizing artificial intelligence, we focus on two main verticals: the vertical of governance and the vertical of development. In the governance, we are hello.
You have 3 more minutes, please.
Yes, so in the governance, we're working to structure the first regional agreement for an ethical development and deployment of artificial intelligence. And I'll just do it really fast because I don't have a lot of time. But the purpose of this agreement is precisely to unify criteria in Latin America in terms of how artificial intelligence should be governed. So how Latin America will integrate its ethical conceptions into one single criteria. Because if we keep working isolated and separated, we will most likely end up colonized again. Only through regional integration is that Latin America can really survive independently in the age of AI. So I don't have a lot of time. I'll just mention the next 3 steps: training, education, and capacitation to the workforce and the local talent. How we gonna supply the demand of this new economy? That was step number 3, training and education. Step number 4, research and development, and we're structuring a network of inter-American R&D laboratories. So here is important to recover the role of the state in fomenting and promoting innovation. And the last but most important aspect is to structure safe and agile governance that can connect tech and policy, which have been disconnected during the last decades. And for that, we need to structure this regional agreement, which we're pushing with many governments. And hopefully, during the next months, this year, we have at least the skeleton of these regional agreements. So thank you, and I am open to all the questions you may have.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for all this information. Really interesting that you put all that into the context of history, just reminding us where Latin America comes from and this history of colonialism, which is really important in the assessment of ethical of ethics, which is really interesting. Really interesting that you also mentioned that obviously due to colonialism there are. We obviously have things that are in common, but you also need in Latin America to be different at some point, right? You cannot be colonized again, as you were mentioning it. So thank you to the 3 of you. That was really insightful. My brain is blown, and I think that obviously all our participants have learned lots of things. And you opened, and that's the most important thing. I think you opened lots of doors towards new perspective, and thank you for that and for the quality of your presentation.